August 14th, 1944. Concordia, Kansas. The train hissed to a stop beneath a sky so wide it hurt the eyes. Sergeant Otto Reinhardt pressed his forehead against the wooden slat and felt the locomotive's tremors cease. 3 weeks ago, he'd been fighting in the hedgerows of Normandy. 2 weeks ago, a Sherman tank's shell had torn his left leg below the knee. 1 week ago, British medics had packed him onto a Liberty ship bound for America with 200 other wounded Germans. Men missing arms, legs, eyes, futures. Now the boxcar door scraped open. Sunlight flooded in like judgment. Before we continue this remarkable story of humanity amid total war, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe if you appreciate deeply researched history that reveals the truths we've forgotten. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. Now, let's step back onto that Kansas platform where everything Otto thought he knew about his enemy was about to shatter. He expected shouting. He expected rifle butts and contempt. He expected the Americans to treat disabled German soldiers exactly as Germany had been taught to treat the weak, as burdens, as failures, as useless eaters unworthy of the fatherland's resources. Instead, an American corporal with a Carolina drawl looked up at him and said, "Easy now, buddy. Let's get you down safe." The man's hands were steady. His voice was kind. And in that single moment, Otto Reinhardt realized something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Everything he'd been told about the enemy was a lie. Camp Concordia rose from the Kansas prairie like a small city dropped from the sky. 304 buildings arranged in perfect military rows. Guard towers stood watch over land so flat a man could see tomorrow coming. The camp had been built in 90 days during 1943, hammered together by contractors who worked through thunderstorms and heat that bent iron. It was designed to hold over 4,000 prisoners. By the summer of 1944, it held exactly that many. But Camp Concordia was different from most POW facilities in one critical way. It specialized in the broken, the disabled, the amputees. The men whose bodies had been shattered by industrial war were sent here because the U.S. Army Medical Department had built something unprecedented within its fences, a full rehabilitation hospital, complete with surgical wards, prosthetic workshops, and physical therapy facilities that rivaled anything available to American soldiers. This wasn't charity. It was law. The Geneva Convention of 1929 required signatories to provide prisoners of war with medical care equivalent to that given their own troops. Article 14 stated clearly, "Every camp shall have an infirmary where prisoners shall receive every kind of attention they need." The United States took that mandate seriously, not because it was easy, not because it was popular, but because it believed that how a nation treated its enemies revealed its true character. By mid-1944, America held 371,683 German POWs scattered across 132 base camps and 334 branch camps from coast to coast. Most were young men captured in North Africa or during the Normandy invasion. They'd expected concentration camps, starvation, brutality. What they found instead confused them more than any propaganda could. Otto Reinhardt's first morning at Concordia began with breakfast. Real eggs, bread with butter, coffee that didn't taste like burnt acorns. He sat at a long wooden table with 11 other amputees and stared at food he hadn't seen since before the war. Across from him, a former Panzer crewman named Klaus whispered in disbelief, "They're feeding us better than the Wehrmacht fed us." No one argued. No one could. After breakfast, orderlies escorted the new arrivals to the camp hospital. It was a sprawling complex of interconnected wards, each one clean, well-lit, ventilated. The smell was iodine and soap, not gangrene and death. American nurses moved between beds with practiced efficiency. Doctors examined wounds with the same care they'd give their own sons. Otto was assigned to Ward 7. His bunk had actual sheets. A pillow, a wool blanket folded at the foot. Through the window he could see Kansas wheat swaying like an ocean made of gold. He lay back and waited for the other shoe to drop. It never did. The head surgeon at Camp Concordia was Major William Garrett, an orthopedic specialist from Ohio who'd spent 2 years treating American amputees before being assigned to POW medical services. He was 42, balding, and possessed the blunt bedside manner of a man who'd seen too much suffering to waste time on pleasantries. He walked through Ward 7 that first afternoon and stopped at Otto's bed. "Sergeant Reinhardt, is it?" Otto nodded, still wary. Your stump's infected. We'll clean it, debride the tissue, let it heal properly. Then we'll fit you for a prosthetic. You'll walk again, understand? Otto understood the words. He couldn't understand the intent. Why? He asked in broken English. Why help us? Major Garrett looked at him for a long moment. Because you're a patient now, soldier. Not an enemy. A patient. Then he moved to the next bed. That evening, Otto watched through the window as American soldiers played baseball beyond the wire. Their laughter carried on the wind. He thought of Germany, of the propaganda films showing disabled veterans hidden away in institutions, of the whispered stories about Action T4 and what happened to those the regime deemed Lebensunwertes lives unworthy of living. He thought about all of it, and he wept. The prosthetic workshop at Camp Concordia occupied Building 47, a converted warehouse near the camp's southern edge. Inside, machinery hummed like a mechanical heartbeat. Bandsaws, drills, lathes, and workbenches covered in wood shavings, metal filings, leather straps, and rubber padding filled the space. It was here that disabled German prisoners learned they hadn't been discarded. They'd been invested in. The workshop employed a mixed crew, American prosthetists, German craftsmen, even a few former enemy engineers who'd built tanks now building artificial limbs. They worked side by side, language barriers bridged by the universal vocabulary of measurement, adjustment, and function. The head prosthetist was a civilian contractor named Earl Hoffman, a 58-year-old Kansan who'd lost 2 fingers to a thresher accident in his youth. He understood disability in his bones. Hoffman believed that a prosthetic wasn't just a mechanical replacement. It was dignity made tangible. Every man deserves to stand on his own 2 feet, he'd say while adjusting a socket fit. I don't care what flag he fought under. He's standing now. Otto Reinhardt entered the workshop for his first fitting 6 weeks after arrival. His stump had healed clean, the infection purged by sulfa drugs and surgical precision. Now he stood on one leg, gripping parallel bars, while Hoffman measured him with calipers and careful eyes. We'll build you something good, Hoffman said through the translator. Not fancy, but functional. You'll be walking without crutches in 3 months. Otto wanted to ask why again. Why waste materials on the enemy? Why invest time and skill in men who'd killed American soldiers? But he'd learned something during his weeks in Ward 7. The Americans didn't see it as waste. They saw it as civilization, as proof that democracy and cruelty were incompatible, that even in total war, humanity could persist. The prosthetic leg they built for Otto Reinhardt was made from willow wood, aircraft-grade aluminum salvaged from damaged planes, and leather harnesses cut from Army surplus. The foot was carved to match his remaining one. The knee joint moved with mechanical precision. It weighed 8 pounds and represented hundreds of hours of work. When they strapped it on for the first time, Otto stood between the parallel bars and looked down at himself. He looked almost whole again. Now comes the hard part, Hoffman said. Learning to trust it. The rehabilitation process was brutal. Otto spent hours each day in the workshop, walking between bars, then with crutches, then with a cane. His stump ached. The socket rubbed blisters. He fell 7 times in the first week alone. Each time, American orderlies helped him up without comment, without mockery, just steady hands and patient encouragement. By October, he could walk 50 yards unaided. By November, he was working on the camp's farm detail, harvesting pumpkins alongside other recovered prisoners. The prosthetic creaked when he walked, but it held. It bore his weight. It let him contribute. One afternoon, while loading pumpkins onto a truck, a local Kansas farmer named Earl Stevens, no relation to the prosthetist, approached the wire. He watched the prisoners work for a moment, then called to the guard. "Those boys doing okay?" The guard shrugged. "Better than okay. They're good workers." The farmer nodded slowly. "My son's in France, fighting their folks. But these ones, they look like they already lost their war." He drove away without another word, but he came back the next week with a basket of apples which he left at the guard station with instructions to distribute them. When Otto bit into one, its sweetness tasted like forgiveness he didn't think he deserved. Not everyone at Camp Concordia experienced such kindness easily. Many German prisoners struggled with cognitive dissonance so severe it manifested as anger. They'd been indoctrinated since childhood to believe in Aryan superiority, in the weakness of democracy, in the inferiority of American mongrel culture. Then they arrived in America and found clean hospitals, abundant food, and enemies who treated them with respect. Corporal Werner Adler was one such prisoner. He'd lost his right arm at Omaha Beach and arrived at Concordia furious. At himself, at the war, at the Americans who'd maimed him. He refused physical therapy. He cursed the orderlies. He called the prosthetists weaklings and fools for wasting resources on prisoners. Major Garrett finally confronted him in Ward 7. "Corporal, you can hate us all you want. That's your right. But you're going to accept treatment, because when this war ends, you're going home, and you'll need that arm." Werner spat on the floor. "I'd rather die than accept your pity." Garrett didn't blink. "This isn't pity, soldier. It's medicine. Now shut up and let us do our job." The prosthetic arm they built for Werner was a marvel of wartime engineering, a hook mechanism operated by shoulder harnesses, allowing him to grip, lift, and manipulate objects. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't flesh, but it was functional. The day they fitted it, Werner sat in sullen silence while Hoffman adjusted the straps. The prosthetist handed him a wrench and pointed at a bolt on the workbench. "Tighten it." Werner glared. Then, almost involuntarily, he reached out with the hook, gripped the wrench, turned the bolt. His eyes widened. "Again," Hoffman said. Werner tightened 3 more bolts. Then he looked down at his new arm and, for the first time since Normandy, didn't see ruin. He saw possibility. He never apologized for his anger, but he never refused treatment again. By December 1944, Camp Concordia had become a model facility. Red Cross inspectors praised its conditions. Military medical journals published studies on its rehabilitation techniques. German prisoners wrote letters home, carefully censored but genuine, describing treatment that bordered on miraculous. One letter, preserved in National Archives records, read, "They have given me back my legs. I do not understand it, but I will remember it forever." The American staff didn't see their work as exceptional. They saw it as necessary, as the logical extension of principles their country claimed to represent, that all men were created equal, that dignity was inalienable, that even enemies deserved mercy. It was democracy lived, not merely spoken. Outside the wire, the war ground on. In Europe, the Battle of the Bulge erupted with shocking fury. In the Pacific, Marines bled on coral islands with unpronounceable names. The world burned. But inside Camp Concordia, disabled men learned to walk again. And in that learning, something shifted. Otto Reinhardt realized it one evening in late December. He was sitting in the camp library. Yes, there was a library stocked with German books donated by churches and civic groups, reading a novel when Werner Adler sat down across from him. Werner's prosthetic hook gleamed in the lamplight. "Do you think," Werner asked quietly, "we were lied to about everything?" Otto closed his book. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and silent. "Yes," he said, "I think we were." They sat together in silence, 2 broken soldiers in an enemy country, wrestling with truths too large to name. Around them, the library was warm. The books were free to read, and no one was watching to make sure they believed the correct things. It was the most dangerous freedom they'd ever known. Spring arrived in Kansas like a whispered promise. The wheat turned green, then gold. Wildflowers exploded across the prairie in riots of color. At Camp Concordia, men who'd arrived as cripples now walked, worked, and waited for a war to end. The news from Europe grew darker, then suddenly bright. Germany was collapsing. The Reich that promised 1,000 years lasted 12. In April 1945, American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe. In May, Berlin fell. On May 8th, the war in Europe officially ended. At Concordia, the prisoners received the news in stunned silence. Some wept. Some stared at nothing. A few cheered, not for victory, but for survival. They'd outlived the regime that sent them. But ending the war didn't mean going home. International agreements required POWs to remain in custody until repatriation logistics could be arranged. For the men at Concordia, that meant months more in Kansas, working farms, refining their prosthetics, existing in strange limbo. Otto Reinhardt enough. He stood, patted Otto's shoulder, and walked away. Otto sat among tools and half-built limbs, finally understanding mercy. It looked like an old man who had lost everything choosing grace instead of vengeance. It looked like democracy made flesh. Repatriation began in November 1945. Disabled prisoners were among the first processed. The journey home would be long, crowded, uncertain, but they would go walking. The day before departure, Major Garrett addressed nearly 200 amputees. You came as prisoners. You leave as patients discharged. Construction had begun. Otto worked for 30 years fitting prosthetics, giving every patient the dignity Hoffman had shown him. Werner Adler helped anyone who couldn't pay. Hoffman died in 1959, yet hundreds walked on limbs he had built. The lesson endures. We are defined not by destruction, but by our willingness to heal. Even enemies. Filled the mess hall. German prisoners and American staff ate together, laughter and broken English mingling. A former teacher, Heinrich, spoke, voice breaking. We thank you. We came as enemies. You treated us as men. We will remember. Applause thundered, not for victory, but for humanity. The next morning, Otto watched Kansas fields stretch golden, reflecting on who he had been and who he had become. Strength, he realized, wasn't absence of weakness, but the courage to rebuild. Back in Germany, cities lay in ruins. But Remagen shell. I could have let that make me cruel, but it wouldn't bring him back. All it would do is add more suffering, and there's been enough of that. Otto nodded, speechless. So, when I fit you for that leg, Hoffman said, I'm not helping the enemy. I'm helping a father's son, someone who's been through hell and deserves a chance at tomorrow. I don't know if I have one anymore. Hoffman sat beside him. Home isn't a place, Otto. It's people. And you're one hell of a person. You'll rebuild, just like you rebuilt yourself. With your help. With your effort. I gave you tools. You did the work. Otto looked at the man who had once been his enemy. Why, Mr. Hoffman? Why help us so much? Hoffman was quiet. My son died at Anzio, killed by a German. Your prosthetics are yours to keep. When you get home, find doctors or improvise. You are proof that broken things can be made whole again. Germany will need men who understand that truth. Otto Reinhardt stood in the back row, leg locked at the knee, memorizing every word. That night, a farewell dinner.
Reinhardt spent those months teaching other prisoners how to walk with artificial legs. He'd become skilled enough that Major Garrett recruited him as an assistant in physical therapy. Every morning, Otto helped newly arrived amputees take their first steps. Every evening, he wondered what waited for him in Germany. The letters from home, when they came, painted grim pictures. Cities reduced to rubble. Food scarce. The occupation harsh, but necessary. And everywhere the revealed horrors, concentration camps, mass graves, evidence of atrocities so vast they redefined evil. Otto read those letters and felt his identity fracture. He'd fought for monsters. He'd believed in lies. And the enemy he'd been taught to hate had shown him more humanity than his own government ever did. How did a man reconcile that? One afternoon in July 1945, Earl Hoffman found Otto alone in the workshop, staring at a half-finished prosthetic. Thinking about home, son? Hoffman asked. Otto shook his head.